Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for Christmas knowledge here on the internet. Merry Christmas to you guys. Today we're going to finish up the two parts of the World War I Christmas Truce video little series done by our friends over at Extra History. And if you did not see part one, check that out. I released it yesterday, but today we're going to go ahead and finish that up. So we learned that in the at the first Christmas in 1914, we're only 3-4 months into the war, there was a very temporary truce, especially between the British and the Germans on Christmas, that led to them doing things like yelling carols at Christmas carols, Christmas songs at each other over no man's land between trenches. Some of them even played some soccer, a little football match, and of course that ended. So we'll see what they got here in part two, but if you haven't seen part one, make sure you check that out. Alright, if you like this original video, make sure you give them a sub and a like if you have not already. There'll be a link down in the description. And if you haven't subbed to my channel, I'd love to have you be a part of community and be a familiar face here. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So this is World War I Christmas Truce, Letters from the Trenches. Let's see what they got for us.
This was a letter to a German newspaper in December of 1914. Yesterday there was a fierce and terrible onslaught of Christmas packages into our trenches. No man was spared. In the confusion, one soldier suffered a salami impaled straight into his stomach. Another had raisins from an exploding pastry fly directly into his eyes. A third had the misfortune of having a bottle of cognac fly into his mouth.
It's like, I mean, it's like heartwarming in a way to see this stuff, but it's also dually so disappointing because of what's going to happen. I mean, all these people that are writing about this, and they're all going to die, and most of them within the next year. It's just, it's tragic that from what it was, because again, people had no idea how long this war was going to be. They thought it was just going to be a few weeks and this would be over, and it showed kind of what they thought of things at that moment. And of course, it's going to be very different down the stretch and as the war continues.
This little holiday special is brought to you by World of Tanks. Use the invite code ARMISTICE if you're a new player who wants to check out the game. World War I was a letter-writing war, one where pencil and paper were a soldier's line of communication with friends and family, and reading those letters provides some insight into what life was like in those trenches. So today, let's read some excerpts from those soldiers' holiday letters.
Cool.
Now, of course, none of us at Extra Credits have ever experienced being deployed over the holidays. So real quick, I want to hand the mic over to somebody who has. Here is Wargaming's military specialist, Richard Cutland, back again to give us a little insight.
Cool.
In my 30 years of service, I was extremely fortunate to only spend around 6 Christmases away from home and family. The first was spent lying in a muddy ditch in Northern Ireland, where we had been ordered to set up an observation post to watch the comings and goings of a known IRA terrorist. Cold, wet, hungry and tired, watching someone else celebrate Christmas with family and friends. It was certainly a low point for us all. As a young soldier, the easiest thing to do was not think about it. It was merely another day amongst a multitude of other days. The real heartbreak occurred after marriage and children. It was wrenching to explain why Daddy would not be there on such a special day. Tales of helping Santa at the North Pole or having to feed the reindeer quickly wore thin as my children grew older and wiser. A soldier's wife has much to contend with, and my own wife's angst and worry during any operational tour was compounded when I was away for the holidays. The armies always tried their best if circumstances allowed. If you were near a headquarters, the chefs would knock up a Christmas dinner with all the trimmings. Well, perhaps not all, but they did their best with what was available. Unfortunately, sitting with 100 men wearing paper hats was not quite the same as Christmas dinner with your family.
Sure.
Yet we were all aware it was necessary to spend such periods away. And let's face it, it was part of the job. But it was always a killer to be told that a deployment was imminent and Christmas would be cancelled. So to all those servicemen and women who find themselves away for this very special time, I salute you and wish you and your families peace and happiness.
Good thing to think of as I'm filming this. It is very early Christmas morning. And it's easy to get stuck in your bubble about the comforts of living in a safe place and being able to, you know, even celebrate a holiday in general. And yeah, we live in our bubble when so many places in the world, so many parts of the world, people are unable to do things like that, and I'm sure, it's impossible to not take it for granted, but it's important that we remember that.
Thank you, Richard. Now let's set the scene. It's Boxing Day, 1914.
Day after Christmas.
And Private Henry Williamson is writing home about the most extraordinary Christmas of his life. I'm writing from the trenches. In my mouth is a pipe presented by the Princess Mary. In the pipe is tobacco. Well, of course, you say. But wait. In the pipe is German tobacco from a German soldier. Yes, a live German soldier from his own trench. On Christmas Eve, both armies sang carols and cheered, and there was very little firing. The Germans called to our men to come and fetch a cigar, and our men told them to come to us. This went on for some time.
This would be scary. You would just within a few hours of that been blasting at each other and probably saw people dying or fearful of death. I know it would be impossible just to tune out completely the war anxiety and just assume the best in your enemy, right? I totally understand that. You come over. No, you come over. Weren't we just shooting each other and trying to kill each other a few hours ago?
Until a bold Tommy crept out and stood between the trenches, and a Saxon came to meet him. They shook hands.
The real
and
MVPs.
laughed. Thus the ice was broken. Our men are speaking to them now. German Corporal Joseph Wenzel was similarly amazed at the gathering, writing, "What I believed to be madness several hours ago, I could see now with my own eyes. Bavarians and English, until then the greatest of enemies, shook hands, talked, and exchanged items. A single star stood still in the sky directly above them, interpreted by many as a special sign from heaven. More and more joined, and the entire line greeted each other. For the rest of my life I shall never forget this scene, which goes to show that human feelings continue to go on, even if, in these times, men do not know anything but killing and murdering. But not..."
In no way it's sad, but no way this happens if the war had gone on longer than it had. It was very new. It was 3-4 months. Some of those people probably just showed up and don't get it. What's about to happen and what war is really like, I guess.
Not everybody held fire. British rifleman John Erskine's unit was fraternizing in no man's land when a soldier, disobeying his officer's order, shot one of the Germans. He writes, "The Germans immediately replied, and instead of firing on where the shot came from, they fired at the first person they saw. Unfortunately, this happens to be one of our corporals, who was shot through the head. A most regrettable fact connected with the affair was that he has 3 brothers in the battalion, and it must have had a disheartening effect on them. The Germans apologized, but it left a black mark on the day. Still, in many places, the peace held, until the generals ended it with artillery." The spirit of the Christmas truce would be rekindled the following year, albeit on a small scale. In December of 1915, French soldier Louis Barthas found himself in a spontaneous ceasefire when heavy rain forced both sides to abandon their trenches. He wrote, "Frenchmen and Germans looked at each other and saw that they were all men, no different from one another. They smiled, exchanged comments. Hands reached out and grasped. We shared tobacco, a canteen of coffee, or Pinard. One day, a huge devil of a German stood up on a mound and gave a speech, which only the Germans could understand word for word, but everyone knew what it meant because he smashed his rifle on a tree stump, breaking it in 2. Applause broke out on both sides. Meanwhile, our..."
Wow. I guess it shows you, too, that on an individual level, that's what it really shows you about soldiers, at war. The individual, which is never thought of in war. You think of the grand thing that they're representing, right? The nation, and it's the German army, it's the British army, it's the Brits, it's the Germans. When you look at, this German individual, this British individual, they are individuals, and they're there because they're supposed to be, right? Because they're supposed to be, right? But on an individual, the individual thought process is not always what it is on paper that wars are supposed to be about, right? And I think that shows that.
Our big shot leaders were in a furor. What in the Lord's name would happen if the soldiers refused to kill each other? German
Especially
soldier
after,
Airman Bauer, also present, was thinking much the same. He wrote, The infantry does not shoot anymore, just the crazy artillery. The masters make war, they have a quarrel, and the workers, the little men, have to stand.
Because you have different jobs, right? The leaders are meant to lead and perform that stuff, and the soldiers are meant to carry that out. And they're going to do what their leaders say, and the leaders have a different objective specifically than an individual soldier, you're right, because you're giving it, you're supposed to be successful, and to see success in the war, that's your job, and as a soldier, your job is simply to carry out those orders. So I could totally see how it might be hard to transition. It's like, tell these guys who had this wonderful evening that they put aside all these differences and the horrible things they'd gone through in just a short period of time, and almost maybe convincing them that, do we really need to fight this war, right? Do we really need to do this? Because we've just proven that we don't, right? At least temporarily. And it might be hard to turn that switch off, right? This peaceful switch or whatever, this more hopeful switch, and then turn on the kill switch, literally. And of course, that's what these leaders, their job is they can't get caught up into the emotional thing there. They're the ones who have to carry out what the big picture is.
They're fighting against each other. Is that not a great stupidity? Once again, senior officers broke the truce with artillery and court-martial threats. The fighting began again, and Barthas would spend 3 more Christmases at
Get over that.
The same was true for many others. In fact, Christmas of 1916 brought Canadian infantryman John McLean his first taste of combat. He wrote, "Dear Mother, I haven't written for over a week now, but I couldn't very well. We went into the trenches on Christmas Eve and were in for 6 days. It was not too bad at all, far better than I expected. All our fellows came out fine, except Jack Ivner, who got a machine gun bullet through the leg. The noise was awful, but a person will get used to that after a while. I spent Christmas Day in a dugout. If I live to be 300 years old, I will never forget this Christmas week."
I've heard from people that have fought or whatever in stories, both direct and indirect, that one of the things that the general population does not know about war is well, I guess a couple things. One is the sound and how loud war is. With, again, the firing, right? If you've ever fired a gun in any situation, you know how incredibly loud it is. And then add tons of them, very high-powered things, and then artillery, and then dealing with troops that are screaming in pain, like this guy probably was that we got it shot through the leg, right? And it's so loud. And the other one I've heard that people don't understand is the smell that comes from combat, the blood, the flesh, like those sort of things. I've heard that, but I especially heard that about the sound, how loud war actually is. It's deafening, and it'd be hard to get used to that, but I guess you do.
One night, I was going up a trench, and I saw a big gray cat sitting on the parapet. I'd like to tell you more, but I can do that when I get home. Now you are doing too much worrying. We're all right if a man is careful. A month later, he was dead. Meanwhile, another Canadian, Jack Davy, was having a bittersweet Christmas. He had come home after months in a POW camp, only to find himself at a military hospital in Toronto, thousands of miles from his new fiancée. He wrote to her on Boxing Day, "Darling Kitty, many thanks for the letter and the card with Christmas wishes. We had quite a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. It's quite a novelty to see a real white Christmas. Yesterday was a lovely day. On the whole, I had a good time, but I hope next year won't be such a disappointment for us, sweetheart. Surely this rotten luck of being separated at Christmas can't go on forever. 1 week has passed since I was measured for my leg. I wish that I could have it by the new year so I could start the year on both feet again. It will soon be 2 years since I walked like a human being. It seems a long time to talk about it, but I can picture those fields and imagine I can see the exact spot where I fell, as though it only happened yesterday. I guess it'll be a long day before I forget it. But I hope that all the dark days are behind us now, sweetheart. We just have to be happy and live long to make up for it all." As the war ended and the veterans trickled home, that is exactly what they tried to do. Yet their holidays spent in the shadow of dugouts would never fully leave them. There are so many letters like these. Honestly, deciding which ones to include was the hardest part. But if this happened to capture your imagination, try something later. If you go home for the holidays, or if you happen to already be there, ask your relatives if they have any old letters lying around. It's possible that the next story from the trenches might come from your own family. Happy holidays, everybody. We'll see you next year.
We don't live in an era where we have a lot of that. I mean, we could pull up your emails. I guess you could do that, your text messages, but we don't have that culture of drafting a message to somebody that you proofread and you take time into doing it. Everything is so instant and short, not well thought out and long and preserved. We don't quite have that anymore, and that's, I guess, kind of sad, to have that it's like we can record history, but are we actually recording history, in this moment? But anyway, glad we checked this out. I think it's good to understand, because this whole scenario of this truce is such an interesting part of history, and tells you a lot about it honestly does tell you a lot about the era and the war, because you can see how, as this war is starting, the ideas of it are different than what they're going to end up being, right? You see a lot of these letters of positivity coming out, and then those people are dead within days. It completely changes, right? But it does show you, again, a lot of the things that the war hadn't worn on them yet. And again, you would never see anything like this in the later Christmases for the war, because of the devastating nature of it. And that next year, in 1915, of course, it's going to get even more violent and more dangerous. And yeah, I mean, all those people that they were just talking about, they're all going to die. I mean, they're all going to die. All those people that went in that early, they don't come out. But a good introspective too, of just looking at the war and looking these like letters, for example, are so important, because we do have a tendency to not humanize wars when we study them in history. We look at, okay, what are the events, but don't actually talk about anything about personal experiences. And I try to, at least in my classroom, get the students to understand that when you look at like a list of casualties, it's easy to be like, oh, okay, 8 million people die or whatever in World War One, and just to think that as an ambiguous number that doesn't mean anything, right? But every single one of those is a person with a story that had a life up to that point and then will die, right? And will not finish that out. Like all these people we just heard letters from, they're not going to live. That's a person, that's a brother, that's a sister, that's a parent, it's a future parent, it's a lot of things. And I think those are good to be able to have. Yeah, if you have people in your life that have been in these major events and you want to get their first hand perspective, I think it's a good thing, even if they don't have letters, just to talk to them about that, about what those things are, because I think it gets you to think about what war is and why it's used and what the experiences are like, because it is such a concept that's easy to be totally backed off and abstract from. With, again, it's easy to make wars very nameless and impersonal. It's very, very easy to do that. So this was great. Sorry to put if that was like a downer, especially here on Christmas. But I think it's important that we understand what Christmas can be like, right? It can be like for people, like in one of the most tragic events that's ever happened. But regardless of that, if you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year coming up to the end of the new year here, wherever time you're in. Yes. Congrats to you and whatever it is that you're doing. So, all right, we'll go ahead and end here. And again, if you have not subbed to them, make sure you do that. Link down to this video will be down below. At least give them a like. Love to have you as a sub here. Also, if you'd like to join our Discord server, which has got a lot of active history-minded and social communities down there. There's a link down below to the Discord down there below. There's at least, I think, about 4,300 people that are members right now at this moment. And great way to connect with other people that are history minded like you. Even if you're not a deep historian, it's not a big deal. It's just a community for people that have a common interest in history. All right. With that, we'll go ahead and end here. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time. Bye.